What's up everyone? Happy holidays. Today, we're going to be looking at a simple way of adding sequences to your player character, similar to the death sequence in The Legend of the Octorok Arena of Time. We won't be making any sort of predefined cutscene, and this is mostly possible with the default spring arm camera setup that comes with the third-person template. For this video, I'm going to be using a custom template that I set up just because it has all of the animations that I need ready to go. None of the assets that I use in this video are required. However, if you are interested in these animations, I will leave a link in the description to the pack that I got them from. With that said, let's get started. The first thing we're going to want to do is set up the sequence in the topmost class that the player will control. And before we can do that, we need to set up a way to trigger it. If you have a base combat class, you'll be overriding the death logic with player-specific logic before starting the sequence. However, for this tutorial, I'm just going to make a new event. And for the sequence to work, we need to keep track of a few variables. 2 rotators to maintain the pitch and the yaw. And in a minute, I'll get into why these need to be 2 separate rotators. And we're also going to need a float for the spring arm length, and a vector for the spring arm target offset. And again, at this point, if you have a base class, you will have already assigned the death boolean, but for this tutorial, I'll create one here. As well, make sure to disable the input for the character's controller. Now, we can go down to the event tick and start setting up the sequence. We only want this to happen while the character is dead, otherwise, it would really interfere with gameplay. So, we can set up a branch, then hold S and click to create a sequence. We'll need 3 pins here, and the first 2 are going to be pretty much identical. First, we can set up the current death pitch to interpolate towards whatever pitch you'd like. This may take some trial and error to get right with your character. In this case, I'm going to be using -5. Then, you're going to want to get the controller and set the control rotation to itself, except for the pitch, which will come from our variable. And you might be wondering why we're storing these values as 2 separate rotators, even though we are breaking them to get a float value. This is required due to the way that Unreal Engine interpolates looping through rotation values. If we store the pitch as a float, there's no way for the engine to determine which direction the rotator should move in the smallest amount, so it will simply reflect the float value, which may give extremely unexpected results. Next, we want to repeat the process for the yaw. However, to make sure that the end position of the camera is always the same regardless of the direction of the character, we can set the target to an offset of the capsule's rotation. As you can see, when I hit the X key, the event triggers and moves the camera. However, the camera is focusing on the back of the character, which is the way the character will be facing once the animation takes over. That still isn't happening yet though, so let's fix that. If you're following along and you have an animation that you'd like to use, all you have to do is right-click, hover over Create, and select Create Anim Montage. Open that up, and the first thing we're going to do really quick is toggle the option over here, Enable Auto Blend Out, to make sure that the montage continues to play the last frame, even after it completes. You can see in my case, this animation starts with the character on the ground, so I also have to set up my montage for Hurt Heavy, which would be forced to play as the hurt montage for the character when it takes damage and is left with 0 HP. This animation pack splits the animation into modular bits, so inside this montage I need to add the sequence for getting up as well. This will be the typical response. However, we can also set up an anim notify right before the sequence triggers to check if the player is dead. To make that happen, we can go to the animation blueprint to add the notify event, cast to whichever class makes the most sense to get a hold of that boolean, and if it's true, force the montage. We're mostly finished now. However, since I don't have a base damage system to trigger the damage montage, we just need to go ahead and quickly add that defeated event. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the fruits of our labor. It just steps backwards. If you're using an animation montage and you find yourself in a position where nothing happens, it just means that your animation blueprint isn't set up to display the required animation slot. Just open up the animation blueprint and add in the default slot, or whichever slot you set up for your montage. And there we go, a simple yet polished looking camera sequence that you can tack on to add a little bit of life to your game. I recommend using this sort of thing as sparingly as possible. Unreal Engine does have much better solutions for cutscenes and other gameplay events. However, it definitely adds a little bit of flair with very little setup. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. It really does help appease the Basilisk algorithm. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, consider subscribing. I hope you have a great day.